Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Books and Books in Coral Gables. Thank you all for coming down tonight. Quick announcement, as you can see from all these cameras and these lights, we're live streaming the event on the internet this evening. A message for our internet audience at home: if at any point during the event you would like to purchase a copy of tonight's book, you can call the number on your screen. We'll get Dr. Chesler to sign that for you, and we'll ship it to you wherever you are in the United States free of charge. Those of us joining us from overseas, the shipping might be a little bit more. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to present Dr. Phyllis Chesler and her new book, An American Bride in Kabul. This is Dr. Chesler's. Dr. Chesler's written 15 books before, or is this number 15? This is number 15. Dr. Chesler is an emerita professor of psychology and women's studies at City University of New York. She is a best-selling author, feminist leader, and psychotherapist. She co-founded the Association for Women in Psychology, the National Women's Health Network, and the International Committee for Women of the Wall. Dr. Chesler has lectured and organized women's rights and human rights campaigns all over the world, and she has recently become a fellow at the prestigious Middle East Forum. As an 18-year-old Jewish-American girl from Brooklyn, she fell in love with a glamorous foreign student and embarked on an adventure that has lasted for more than a half-century. In 1961, when she arrived in Kabul with her Afghan bridegroom, authorities took away her American passport. She was now the property of her husband's family. Her husband, a wealthy, westernized college student with dreams of reforming his country, reverted to traditional and tribal customs. She found herself unexpectedly trapped in a posh polygamous family without any rights. In spite of everything, she managed to escape, and this memoir describes how the ordeal influenced her to become a feminist leader and lifelong defender of human rights. Here to tell us more about it, please give a very warm welcome to Dr. Phyllis Chesler.
Hello. Okay, so I have to, for the reasons of the camera, I can't look directly at you. I have to look this way.
You can look at the audience all you want.
I can, it's all right? Okay. I once lived in a harem in Afghanistan, and I love my opening sentence. It reminds me of Isaac Dickinson's I Had a Farm in Africa, from her book Out of Africa. Both Dickinson and I had romances with whole continents, entire cultures. We had grand adventures that transcended any single relationship. And such adventures can be costly and are sometimes fatal. Yes, I once lived in a harem in Afghanistan, but I nearly died there too. A harem simply means the women's quarters. It is forbidden to all men who are not relatives. If you can't leave without permission or without a male escort, you are in a harem and living in purdah, and such was my fate. But why did I write this book now? Afghanistan and its people seem to have followed me right into the future and into the West. Islamic hijab, headscarves, which I don't oppose, and niqab, face masks, and burqas, full body bags, which I do oppose, are here in America, on the streets and in the headlines. Afghanistan has also landed in the West, and the West is still deployed in Afghanistan. And no, I don't think we should be there. Ask me about this afterwards. Afghanistan is the country where I was once held hostage. Eerily, it is the same country that sheltered bin Laden, where he hatched his 9/11 diabolical plot, after Saudi Arabia and Sudan exiled him. And now the entire civilian world, both Muslim and infidel, is held hostage to that brand of jihadic terrorism, to that Al-Qaeda style. This was a pretty eerie coincidence to me. My adventure has indeed lasted for more than 50 years. When my Afghan husband fled just before the Soviets invaded, he fled, and he came to America and he knocked on my door. And I have been criticized for ever speaking to him again. But Americans and Jews have a long tradition of hospitality to those in exile, to immigrants who come to our shores. So I didn't turn away from him and from his second wife and their then young children. And I recount some of our conversations that took place between 1980 and 2012 in the book, and they serve as a conversation between East and West. Perhaps like so many other Jewish dreamers, I yearned for a mystical union between Yitzchak, Isaac, and Yishmael, and thus I married Ishmael. And I kept company with him for 2.5 years. I was 18, but I was not a complete fool. I mean, I thought I knew him. And we never once discussed religion or Afghanistan. And we prided ourselves on being bohemians and freethinkers and existentialists, beatniks, artistes. He never, ever prepared me for what my life or his life would be like in Kabul. And he never told me that his father had 3 wives and 21 children, and that I would be expected to live with my mother-in-law, and that women still were wearing burqas, even though there was reform underway, real reform, or that I would be pressured to convert to Islam. He never mentioned this. It never came up. And when we landed in Kabul, indeed, an official very smoothly took away my passport. I said, wait, that's my American passport. Oh, it's a formality, madame. We'll send it to the villa to your home. I never saw the passport again. And that becomes an entire chapter in the book, because at that moment, I became a citizen of no country with no rights and the property of a very large and powerful polygamous Muslim family. And I thought that this adventure would be romantic. We would travel throughout all of Central Asia. I found myself instead transported back to the 10th century with no passport back to the future. I lived gender apartheid long before the Taliban came to power. And looking back, I understand that that may indeed have turned me into the firebrand feminist that I became. Was it all bad? Oh, no. But such adventures do not come cheaply. A Westerner does not travel to the Wild East without risking dysentery, malaria, parasites, hepatitis. I had 2 of those. Without risking being kidnapped and held for ransom, or sold at auction and sold into an imperial harem. Many Western women adventurers flourish, and I write about their fabulous forgotten stories in the book. For example, in 1846, Harriet Martineau, the British-born author, visited the Arab Middle East, and she writes about the harems of Cairo. Everywhere they pitied us European women heartily, that we had to go about traveling and appearing in the streets without being properly taken care of, that is, watched. They think us strangely neglected and being left so free, and boast of their spy system and imprisonment as tokens of the value in which they are held. There cannot be a woman of them all who is not dwarfed and withered in mind and soul. Ironically, the 19th century harem dwellers in Cairo and Istanbul could not believe how confined their Western visitors were in all their hoops and corset stays and bustles. They were hanging out, lounging in caftans. They were cool. We were all straight-laced and sweating. And the harem women examined the dressing, the dresses and the corsets of their Western visitors. So there I was, a first-generation American kid, a scholarship kid, living in a city 6,000 feet above sea level, which had once been the crossroads of the known world, in a palatial home surrounded by awesome snow-capped mountains, and where paganism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism had once flourished. Yes, Buddhism. Before the Arab invasion resulted in the forced conversion of the Afghan people to Islam, like so many others around the globe, Afghans were once Buddhists. They were pagans. They were Zoroastrians. They were Hindus. And Jews lived among them, certainly from the 9th century on, possibly much earlier than that. Despite all my considerable sorrows, I will never forget the warmth and the kindness of my young brothers-in-law and my 2 sisters-in-law who understood how unhappy and truly endangered I really was. And the female servants were very shy and very sweet and entirely without malice. They were also sleeping on the floor with no heat, and their wages were pitiful, and they worked 24/7 and around the clock. I found this as shocking as I found nearly everything else. And the people in general, the Afghan people, certainly the men, because most male adventurers only get to meet male Afghans, never women. They have a great ceremonial genius and a wild sense of humor. They're really very funny. And I had been told that my father-in-law had helped found the modern banking system of the country, and it's true, and all the major import-export companies. These enterprises and equivalent banking functions had been totally in the hands of the Hindus and the Jews of that country, who overnight were impoverished by a royal edict in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And I only discovered that shocking fact as I was researching this book. And my husband is as much a dreamer as I. He brought a Jewish American infidel bride, an intellectual bride, back with him to a country that had made alliances with German Nazis and that had also given Nazis a safe haven after the Second World War. In retrospect, I am irrationally ashamed that I once thought such a country was exotic and beautiful, which, alas, it is. Then there was the matter of the burqa. I was terrified when I first saw women literally huddled at the back of a bus. This is pre-Rosa Parks in the American South. I thought that they were laundry that was moving. I had run away. I wanted to see the city, and I got on a bus, very gaily colored bus, very fanciful, whimsical designs. And indeed, they were women in burqas. Under the burqa, they had a handbag, they had a baby, they had a shopping bag. All the men on the bus looked at me because I was naked-faced, and they really stared at me. So I got off the bus very quickly, and I began to understand why my Afghan family were so afraid of my wild Western ways, so that what we would take for granted, getting up in the morning, going out, taking a walk on the street, totally forbidden, totally dangerous. The public space is not meant for women. And my Afghan family felt that my reaction to the burqa was an overreaction, because they viewed it as a normal thing. They viewed my reaction against it as abnormal, as inappropriate. And I now know that the Quran mandates modesty for both men and women. It does not mandate that women wear claustrophobic, ambulatory, isolation chamber body bags. That is not in the Quran. And as a women's rights and a human rights activist and someone concerned with health, this is a very terrifying garment to find yourself in, or to be on the street with someone who is in one and there's nothing you can do to rescue her. And I'm not talking about hijab. Because hijab is not a problem. You can see somebody's face, their features, you can converse with them, they can go about their business in the West. And in the 20th century, there's another thing. Women were naked-faced twice in Afghanistan by royal edict, and in Egypt, in Lebanon, in Turkey, in Iran, Persia, North Africa, and to varying degrees in many Arab Middle East countries, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and certainly Egypt. Now, they're covered in darkness. Now the pendulum has swung back to the 7th century. And it may be coming our way if we don't know what to recognize about it. In my lifetime, Afghanistan has turned literally into a Margaret Atwood dystopian novel, even darker and more misogynistic than The Handmaid's Tale. Given the increasing persecution and subordination of Muslim women and dissidents, I decided to connect my own 5 months in Purda to the surreal lives of Afghan and Muslim women today. And I hope that my story will serve to bring Muslim feminists and dissidents closer to what is presumably an American feminism. Now, the Al-Aqsa Intifada of 2000 and 9/11 both changed the direction that this book would take. How could I write about Afghanistan and about Muslim women and Muslim intellectuals and Muslim homosexuals without also writing about jihadic terrorism and the war against Muslim civilians, the perpetual religious war between Sunni and Shia, and then thereafter against infidels, and against both Israel and the West? Now, my views are shared by the Muslim and ex-Muslim dissidents and feminists with whom I work. We are all anti-Islamists or anti-Shariaists. We oppose totalitarianism, terrorism, gender and religious apartheid, and support individual gay and women's rights, freedom of speech, and above all, freedom of religion, which means separation of religion and state. I have now published 3 studies on honor killing, and I'm working on a 4th one. And they were published in Middle East Quarterly. And I've also submitted affidavits based on my research for those in flight from being honor killed and who have come looking for asylum in America. So really, why did I go to Afghanistan? What could possibly have been going on? Well, why else than to be able to tell you about it now, at this moment in history? It was Kismet, Bashert, fated, written in the stars. Clearly it was my destiny. Now I'd like to end this mini lecture with a little reading from the book, a very brief reading. It's a bookstore. It's a fabulous bookstore. I love it. What, if anything, do I owe Afghanistan, a country where I once lived and where I nearly died? I was there. It remains a part of me. I am now a tiny part of the country's history. I will never forget my time there, the natural splendor that I at least glimpsed. This is an accounting of sorts. A young Jewish American woman once came to this wondrous Asiatic country and fled harem life. She finally uncovered the history of what happened to the Jews of Afghanistan and of Islam, and she has told their story in order to redeem her soul. A young Jewish American woman once loved a young Muslim Afghan man, and although it could not work out, they continued talking to each other down through the decades of their lives. Abdul Karim, that's not his real name, a misogynist, a deceiver, a dreamer, now a man living out his days in exile, turned out to be one of my muses, as did Afghanistan itself. I have turned my brief sojourn and my subsequent lifelong interest in the Islamic world into a writer's treasure. I experienced what it was like to live with people who were permanently afraid of what other people might think, even more so than in small mine town USA. Writing this book has also put me in touch with the long-buried tenderness that I still feel for Abdul Karim, especially now that he has become a character in these pages. We remain connected in our own unspoken ways. Thank you. I could speak on. I am ready for questions or answers. All right, and then you. Yes.
You said that you were anti-Shariaist, and,
Yes.
I think one of the things I wonder is there any reconciliation between Sharia and, I don't know how to phrase the question, Western world or more moderate views? Is
Well,
Shariaism of itself extreme?
There are two answers. One answer is that Islam has not yet had a reform. It has not yet diversified into Protestantism or into many branches of belief, and that may never happen, and it may be fully underway now. So the Islam of the 7th century and those who wish to live with stonings for adultery, cross amputations, caning, flogging if you're showing a wisp of hair, that brand, that interpretation of Sharia is not, we can't live with that in the West, in the modern West, where we have individual rights and a belief in universal human rights, which I have. It's not possible. Luckily, we live in a country where we have American law. And I know that there is some concern that maybe there'll be creeping Sharia law making its way snake-like into American law. I'm not sure that that's so possible. I don't see American courts saying, okay, take that woman out and her family can absolutely honor kill her because she doesn't want to marry her first cousin. I don't see that happening here. There are many terrible things happening here, but it's not happening through the American court system. I don't see, and by the way, the Quran doesn't mandate honor killing either. That's very tribal. That's a tribal custom that some Hindus as well as Muslims practice. The Hindus only do so in India. I did a study about this. When they come to America or to Europe, they don't bring that custom with them, but Muslims do. But we don't believe in female genital mutilation, which is also not in the Quran. It's an African practice, but many Muslims increasingly do that, especially in Egypt. They do it in America. It's under the radar. It's happening here, as is polygamy now here, even though we've outlawed it. So the answer to your very important question is, if we're vigilant, if we educate ourselves, if we make it our business to know what is happening, then we have American remedies, we have Western remedies to deal with barbarism. What was your question?
I wanted to know what the role of your parents were when you took off to Afghanistan. I was just trying to imagine what they were thinking when their 18-year-old daughter...
Well, no, I knew him for 2 years at college. So I met him when I was 18 and a half. And my mother knew that I was different. She knew I was a rebel child. I had joined a very left Zionist group in youth and went totally against the Orthodox Judaism of my family. I joined Hashomeah Hatzaiyah, and when the rabbis thundered at me, "You can't join that godless communist outfit," I joined Ein Harod, which was to the left, and I was only 10 or 11. So my mother knew she had a wild child on her hands from early on. And they were very quiet. My mother knew I would be back. She didn't understand that I could be trapped and I can get very sick and that I could nearly die and that nobody would care and that I could have been buried in a Muslim cemetery in some far-flung locale on planet Earth, but which could have happened very easily. And I began hearing about honor killings when I was there. That was not the word used for it. And to this day, when I would bring this up to my Afghan husband in America in the 1990s, in the early 21st century, he'd say, "Honor killings, never heard of it." And then I'd say, "Well, have you heard about the Shia case?" Very high profile case in Canada, where a father, a mother, a biological mother, and a biological son conspired to kill the first wife, who was not the biological mother of anyone, and 3 biological daughters. They're all Afghans. It happened in Canada. The highlight of my research, my moment, was when I met the prosecutor in the Shia case, and he told me that they had relied on my research in their prosecution. But Abdul Karim had never heard of this, nor had he heard of any of the other high-profile honor-killing cases that go on in America. That is because it would be shameful to admit this. So when something is shameful, or when you think an infidel would be critical and would get one up on you, over on you, against you, mock you, look down on you, you say, I never heard of it and it doesn't exist. It's like the way we handle incest. You know, didn't happen, he didn't do it, we didn't know about it, it was her fault. Anyway, it was a long time ago, it doesn't matter now. Right? So people cover their shame with denial, and also with victimizing the truth tellers. Yes?
As a result of your experience, what has happened to your relationship with Judaism?
Well, initially, she's asking, how has this experience affected my relationship to Judaism? For a very long time, there was no connection. I began to note anti-Semitism, which became the subject of a book of mine in 2003. I noted it in the late 1960s on the left in America and in Europe. And I did Jewish feminist rituals through the 1970s, through the 1980s. It was only in 1988 when I was in Jerusalem for a conference on women's empowerment, when my Torah study partner now had the idea to go and pray for the first time ever just women in the women's section at the Western Wall. That was a grand enough moment, and I was asked to open the Torah for the women to read from the Old Testament. And I thought, oh, what I want to do is study Torah. So I have been doing that since 1989 with much joy, and I've published interpretations of Torah, Divrei Torah. But that took an enormous feminist ferment, again, great luck coincidence, to be at such a grand moment. And we struggle. It is 26 years later, and we have not yet quite won that right. And things are happening. This is the Women of the Wall story. So if you grow up in Borough Park, as I did, in Brooklyn, in the early 1940s, girls did not have a future in religion at that time. So I left. I didn't see a future for myself, even though I was known as the smartest, quote, boy in the Hebrew school class. So Torah study, and it's interesting, I believe very strongly in working with religious Muslims, and I've persuaded apostate Muslims that they really have to, if we are going to make a resistance movement, then we need all of us, and that the right to practice a religion is as important as the right not to be coerced into practicing that religion, right? So I don't know if there's a direct, I would say when I discovered the shameful history of the Jews of Islam, when we thought that only European Holocaust era or pogroms in the West is what troubled the Jews, when I began to look into the history of the ceaseless pogroms in Muslim lands against infidels, certainly today against Christians, big time. But the Middle East, the Muslim Middle East, is now Judenrein. All the Jews have been chased out. And the question of whether a Jewish presence will be allowed in the state of Israel at all hangs in the balance every day and every night. But I didn't know that then. I never met a Jew in Afghanistan. They may all have left by the time I was there. And my mother-in-law, whose life was not easy, and she was so mean to me, and she envied and feared me and followed me around and made terrible accusations and cursed me. Mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, there's research literature on how bad a relationship this is in certain cultures and countries, as in, think of India, where their dowry, they're burning the bride in the kitchen to get a new bride for a new dowry. And there's a special wing in Delhi of a prison only for mother-in-laws who've killed their daughter-in-laws. So the relationship, and think of co-wives. People say, well, polygamy is great. You have company, you have help with childcare. Oh, no, no, no. No, the bitter rivalries between the women pale in comparison to the rivalries between the half-siblings, especially the sons, who want to inherit and who look for the most affection and attention from the very absent and very important father. So polygamy is not such a good idea, psychologically, and I don't accept the feminist arguments in favor of it. Yes, I promised her next.
I wanted to say it's such an honor to be here. I came across your work while doing research for my custody case, and I saw that your book titles kind of spoke for like my life issues. If somebody were to write about it, you know, women's inhumanity to women inhumanity to women while there's on trial. So I had to get this book. I borrowed the only library copy. I couldn't put it down. I loved that on so many levels, especially the fact that you could recreate the voice of your youth, you know, in your 20s and feeling adventurous. Even, well, you know, in hindsight now, you know, all the, you know, you withheld, let's say, all the bitter truths that came later. I wanted to ask you, you said you brought 3 things back with you from Afghanistan, your orange passport, the water pipe, and a song. And I was wondering if you were up for
No,
singing
I
the
wouldn't
song.
sing. I'll give you a little. Dee da 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 dum, la da 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 dum, da 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 dum, da 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 dum. There's more, and there's words. You're welcome. Welcome. She wanted to know what were the 3 things I brought back with me from Afghanistan. And I brought a hubble bubble, a nargila, turquoise, like what I'm wearing, glazed so brilliantly and bright, and my orange Afghan passport, which allowed me to return to America. I kissed the ground at Idlewild, now Kennedy Airport, literally, the land of liberty and libraries. I was back, but I had to fight to stay here because the State Department started hounding me when my visa was up. So that was, I said, I will chain myself to the Statue of Liberty. Gentlemen, I'm not leaving. But it took 3.5 years of, he wouldn't get divorced. He wanted me to come back. Unbelievable stuff. So, and then a song. I had probably one of the servants who I wanted to take out with me. It's so interesting. She and her young girl, it would never have worked because she's tightly enmeshed in a network, a tribal network that's clan and family, and where would she be but lost in America? She may have taught me the song. It could have been a young brother-in-law who did, but I felt it was very important to have it. Yes.
I too grew up in Borough Park and went to New Utrecht High School. And I recently went back to Borough Park a couple of months ago, and the similarities between your Afghanistan and the separation of men and women was so incredible. I felt like I could not walk down the street because there were groups of men and they about-faced, and it's really incredible what has happened to a neighborhood in 50 years. It's been ghettoized and certainly not feminized. And
Well, you know, Muslim women have to pray at the back of a mosque behind thick curtains, and they can barely see or hear. And there are Hasidic women and ultra-Orthodox women who are in a similar position. And there are feminists fighting against this in all of the religions. It's a hard fight. Certainly Women of the Wall is the, I'd say, the symbol of the fight in Judaism. Borough Park, I don't understand what happened. The Jews got so scared that they retreated into the past, thinking that extreme traditionalism will save them or will save Judaism. It's horrifying. Now, I don't like I don't like the heavy, shapeless, unflattering garments that the women have to wear in certain sects, but in modern Orthodox sects, they wear chandeliers on Shabbos. I mean, everybody's decked out. I had one incident in Borough Park. I used to go back there to buy books at Eichler's. I went to try on some caftans, and I thought I would nearly lose my life because the women in the dressing room were very tough women. And so you think, oh, religious women, they're underfoot, they're meek. No, they're not meek. They're aggressive and towards other women. And when it comes to purchasing items that they want. But, I share with you a sorrow that even as you have feminist interpretations of Torah and of the Quran and of the New Testament, and women are assuming serious religious authorities in these religions, that we have a backward drift that is upsetting, very upsetting. Yes?
I wonder if you learned, I guess it's Pashto is the local language?
Pashto, Dari or Pashto.
Did you learn enough of the local language to be able to converse with other women without an intermediary, to learn how women in Afghanistan felt about their status, their life, what they had?
Well, I have since then, but at the time I was 20, and I was trapped, and I was isolated, and I was watched. And if I wanted to go out, even though I escaped a number of times, they understood that I would need a chauffeur, a driver, a male escort, and a female relative to help me. And indeed, I could easily get lost. So I spoke to the women in my family in English and French, in semi-Yiddish German. I begged every day, for a teacher in Dari or Pashto, and I wrote all the words down phonetically. I went around pointing to things, asking, what's this, what's this? But I did not get that tutor. On the other hand, when I was near unto death and had hepatitis that had killed every other foreigner that season in Kabul, and I begged for a doctor, it took a very long time for me to get one. So cheaply is female life held. There's no way we can conceive of it. We don't believe it. I thought my Jewish mother, if I had a fever, a slight fever, we would be off to the pediatrician. It would be at the emergency room. Here, I had 106. Well, she's going to live or die. Finally, a doctor came with no expertise and said, she's nervous like the other foreigners. So did I go? I saw incredible things that I write about in the book. I mean, I wanted to start visiting hospitals, which are in terrible shape now, were it not for Western intervention and international humanitarianism, which, by the way, remember I said before that I don't think we should be there? The moment boots on the ground depart, every shelter for battered women, every rape crisis center, every school for girls will be bombed to the 7th century. The question is, do we want to expend more blood and more treasure going up against tribalism and barbarism, where it seems we can't prevail with good works and good examples? Do we pull out, knowing full well what will happen to the children and to the women? This is a question I want America to grapple with. By the way, the Taliban, really, it's Pakistan that has given us the Taliban, not merely America of yore. And if we want to really get rid of the Taliban, we have to deal with Pakistan, a nuclear ally. Not so easy. And now we have terrible news. They're about to pass a new law in Afghanistan, which will mean no family member can testify against another family member, because that will be very bad for the family, right? What is that telling us? That if a girl finally says, they've cut off my nose, my ears, they've tortured me, they tried to prostitute me, my mother-in-law beats me every day, my brother-in-law beats me every day, she will not have any possibility of access for redress or for a hearing, because that would be bad for family life. It was actually in all the papers this past weekend. We leave, it's over.
How do we resolve this sort of crisis short of perpetual war with another side of the world, another culture? I mean, the question you raise is what you want America to grapple with is an incredibly interesting and pertinent question. And I wonder if we're really at a stage where we can write about these things, we can discuss these things, but we have no resolution for this.
Well, Rory Stewart, who wrote an extraordinary book about, he walked on foot from Herat to Kabul in dead of winter in the footsteps of Babur the Great. British people can do adventure like nobody else can. And he's now in the British Parliament. And he said that we are not morally obligated. One is not morally obligated to do that which is not possible. So we who would like to think that every opportunity is around the next corner, that we can fix it, we can make it better, we can heal the world, we can cure things, we can sit down and use reason, are up against a truth that we don't want to accept, that approach, that humanitarian approach, may not work. Didn't work with Hitler. Didn't work with Hitler's allies in Japan. May not work. Alas. And the Muslims who are trapped and who are escaping want support for their embrace of human rights and gay rights and women's rights and freedom of conscience and freedom of religion. And that is what we need to offer to those who are here, as opposed to saying, well, it's their custom to drape their women in a bedsheet. And we can't say different because it's their religion and it's their choice and it's a religious choice. Oh, they're beating her because she doesn't want to marry the first cousin and she's 12. Well, we can't pry into private family matters. And indeed, every honor killing in Canada and in America has had social workers who were remiss, who didn't believe that a family would kill a daughter. And an honor killing is not like Western domestic violence. It's very, very different. It involves a conspiracy of a family against usually a young girl for the smallest infraction of obedience. And when I mean a conspiracy, I'm talking about a mother, a father, sisters, a brother, a cousin, aunt, uncle. And they increasingly have been tried and convicted in Europe. Not exactly yet here. And so what we can do here is apply our concept of what is good, what is right, what is lawful, what is legal here for whoever is here. That'll keep us very busy. Yes.
What kind of reception did you get by your family when you finally made it back to the States?
Well, I weighed 90 pounds. I was very sick. I was very jaundiced, and I was very pregnant. And I was ready to walk out of Afghanistan. I was ready to just follow the nomads, although I had rejected that. It happens to be a theme that James Michener deals with in Caravans. But I rejected that because the nomads would just, kidnap me and keep me. I had nothing to give them of value. So I knew that if anyone knew that I was pregnant, I would never be allowed to leave. And I knew that the clock was ticking and I had to leave. So when I came here, my family, I called from the airport and they said, we're on our way, don't move. They came to get me, my mother and my father. They should both rest in peace. And I went back to college. I had a semester left. I had no intention of not completing my last semester, my dream was that we would go there. I would meet his family. It would be very sophisticated and so interesting. We did go to Iran. We went through Europe. Oh, what high life, you know. As I say in the book, it was very much like an Italian film, I thought. And he was, he wasn't Yul Brynner. He was Omar Sharif. You know, it was so hard. When I came back, I couldn't tell anybody what really had happened, because when I tried, they didn't understand and wouldn't believe me. I would say things like, slavery. I saw slavery. I saw servants treated like slaves. I'd say the women, they had no value. We went to a maternity hospital, and there was a woman screaming, and then it turned out that her husband, who had come, was fighting with the doctor in charge because the wife died, the baby was about to die. The father didn't want to have to pay for nothing. He said he's going to have to take a lot of money down to get a new wife for all of his other kids. So why was the doctor demanding payment? There wasn't a single word, and I had my Afghan husband translate all of this for me. There wasn't a single word. She's died. This is terrible. I'm so sorry. How could this have happened? How could you have killed her? No. It was about the purchase price of the new bride. So I understood where I had been, and I tried to tell a philosophy professor. I said, my heart, I'm glad to be back. I've been through hell and back. And I told him a little bit. He's a very great, famous man. And he said, you should have an affair. So I thought, he's an idiot. You know, the kind of conversation that I needed to have has only become possible in the 21st century. The kind of understanding, the comprehension, the give and take. So I now work, as I've said, with Muslim and ex-Muslim dissidents and feminists, and they get what I'm saying. I don't have to persuade them of anything. And they ask me why more academics and feminists especially don't understand, and instead of understanding say, well, everything is culturally relative. Everything is multiculturally relativistic. Who are we to judge another culture? The very same critics who know full well that America is a bad country, we had slavery here, we're racist, we're sinful, we were imperialists, we were colonialists, capitalists. The history of Islam is a very long history of imperialism, conversion via the sword, anti-black racism and slavery, gender and religious apartheid, and yet nobody here is saying, oh my God, so we're all with blood on our hands, and maybe Islam is not pure, and maybe it could be the tradition has been dangerous, first to Muslims and then to all others. Maybe it's a dangerous tradition. Instead, we say, well, you know, we're so guilty. I mean, we're so persuaded by the works of Edward Said that we're guilty, and what matters is racism and anti-colonialism, not women's rights, not universal human rights. And I believe that's what we have to focus on. Another yes? Yes.
We keep hearing about Sunni and Sufi and Shia, and I haven't heard you mention in Afghanistan. Is there?
They're Sunni. They're Sunni. They're like Saudi Arabia. Shia are in Persia, Iran. Right now, and I said that there was a perpetual, endless civil religious war between Shia and Sunni. That's everywhere. Iran is Shiite, and it now is trying to dominate the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, partly as a religious war, partly as an economic matter. And Saudi Arabia is Sunni, and those in Afghanistan are Sunni as well. Okay, yes. I didn't know that at the time either. I didn't know that my Afghan husband was a Pushtun, which is the largest and historically the most dominant tribe. There are many, many, many tribes in Afghanistan. It's basically The country is mountainous, it's inhospitable, it is treacherous, it is dangerous from every point of view. People live in small villages, isolated one from the other. They have no interest in a centralized government up until this moment. I hope it changes tomorrow. And Afghanistan now is the largest opium producer, and the warlords are making a lot of money from it, forcing the farmers to do that, to cultivate the poppies, and it finds its way to the West. We buy it. We're hooked on it. It killed that wonderful actor, Philip Seymour Hoffman. Well, he killed himself with it. So it is it's a complicated history. Again, it's not one that I ever discussed during the courtship and romance with my Afghan husband. I have learned it by reading many, many, many books and by talking to people. So that's the Sunni Shia. Disastrous. I wish they could resolve that, but, not up to me. Yes.
Yes, you said that you were pregnant when you left.
Yes.
How does a child deal with those two worlds?
I think most of the children can't and don't. I had a miscarriage. I was too ill to carry a child. So I didn't even have a choice. But your question, if both parties are living in a modern Western world, there's maybe less of an issue. There are some women, and I write about them, who've married Muslim men because they wanted to have a life that was made for them, ready-made. Always with company, female company, always with ceremony, always with something to do, no loneliness, no decisions that you have to make in the West when you're sort of free and independent. Everything is done together, every rule. That's like the Borough Park, by the way. Everything is laid out, a set table, rules that you follow, you're set. And indeed, one of the women at the drop of a veil, Marianne Ali Reza, whose book I write about, she had a wonderful time in Saudi Arabia, married to a member of the royal family. She was very happy, had 5 children, and then one day that man said to her, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and I'm taking the kids from you, go away. And she did a very smart thing in the last 20 pages of her book. I was shocked. I was going to use her as an example of somebody who really made out happily. She said, and I, with the help of friends, I kidnapped my kids back. And they grew up in America. She was from California. But then she did this marriage in the 1940s. There's somebody even more fabulous in the 1918 from Scotland who married a Pathan tribal chief's son who became a diplomat. And she, Sarah Shah, is the progenitor of the Tahrir Shah, Idris Shah, Sarah Shah, the contemporary writer. So she went there and she wore a burqa, and his father said to her, Louisa Elizabeth was her Scottish name. He said, well, if she'll convert to Islam and she knows how to hold the fort with a gun, you could marry her. And she was happy to convert to Islam in 1918, and she was a Scottish Highlander's daughter, and she knew how to hold the fort. Very, very wonderful writing. The best adventure writing is Rosita Forbes, which probably nobody's ever heard of, and she's out of print, and I discovered her. And she's in the 1920s and 1930s, and she went everywhere, including to Afghanistan. British, as I said, they go without sleep, they go without water, they don't need food, they climb the most rugged landscapes possible, and on horseback, they ride into desert storms, straight into them, just for the fun. And I'm not exaggerating. So I think that we have reached very rapidly nearly the end of this wonderful evening. Is this about it? Do we leave each other now forever?
How did you get a passport?
You will have to read the book. But no, I got my Afghan passport. You'll read the book. You'll see how. Well, it's in the book. It's in the book.
If there are no more questions, a reminder for you can in the signing language.
Yes.
A reminder for our internet audience at home: if you'd like to purchase a copy of An American Bride in Kabul, please
Right.
call the number on your screen. Dr. Chesler will sign that for you. We'll mail it to you wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. All of our live stream events are archived, so you can visit the Books and Books website. There's a link to the live stream, and any event that we've live streamed you can watch at any time at your convenience. For those of you here in the house, we have An American Bride in Kabul, and we also have a selection of Dr. Chesler's other books. This is just some. There's much more over there at the counter. She will be signing here at the table to my left. This was fascinating. Please give her a big